or blessing number 9 of the Mangala Sutta, to do with self-discipline, or what's known in Pali language as Vinaya. If you look at it in the context of what we already studied concerning how to apply what we know, how to be skillful in getting knowledge, how to apply what knowledge you have, then the discipline part of this formula is to do with knowing where to draw the line. Because although you may be very clever and very skilled in doing something, but it may not be something which is good for society. It may cause harm to others. It may show lack of responsibility towards the human dignity of yourself or other people. So to have Vinaya, or to have self-discipline, it's concerned with knowing when what you are doing exceeds the bounds of good conduct. In fact, from the Buddhist Concepts course, we already have studied quite a lot about this subject. When I talked about refraining from all unwholesome deeds, Sabba Papasa Akaranang, then we already gave quite a lot of examples of ways in which we refrain from doing things which are not wholesome. If you can remember back that far, then we talked about, for example, refraining on the spur of the moment, refraining because one has taken the precepts, and for those who have an enlightened mind, those for whom even the intention of unwholesomeness doesn't arise in the mind anymore, so that there is no intention to drive unwholesome speech or unwholesome actions. Much of the content of the 9th blessing is rather similar. So I'll talk about the parts of the 9th blessing which we haven't mentioned so far. And I think probably the first and most important thing to do is to say what sorts of sets of discipline we have available to us in Buddhism. Because generally speaking, in the Theravada Buddhism anyway, we have 4 different sets of discipline which we apply depending on our status and depending on our walk of life. Normally the 5 precepts and the 8 precepts are the domain of lay people, whereas the 10 precepts and the 227 precepts are the domain of monastics. 5 precepts is the minimum set of morality which is acceptable to Buddhists. Any less than that doesn't really cover all the possible unwholesome actions. So what is important is that if you set your mind to keep a certain set of precepts, that you should keep the whole of that set. Not just think that, for example, I'll keep 6 precepts because it's better than keeping 5 precepts. Really, if you want to keep 6 precepts, you should keep 8 precepts, because it has a different objective. The 5 precepts is merely to ensure that you don't do anything unwholesome, to protect yourself from bad karma. But the 8 precepts has a slightly higher objective, to train your mind to become pure and unattached to sensual matters as well, so that you can meditate more easily. So each set of the precepts has its particular objectives. The 10 precepts are normally suitable for novices or novice monks. It's a discipline which they keep as a sort of probation. In fact, the only difference between 8 precepts and the 10 precepts is the fact that the person who keeps 10 precepts doesn't handle money. But apart from that, the objectives are more or less the same. The fact that novices dress in yellow robes and shave their head and so on, this is not in the 10 precepts, but it is part of the way of life expected of novices, rather than being their discipline. 227 precepts, I'll talk about that in a little more detail at the end. The thing I'd like to talk about more today is how we can be sure whether we are managing to keep the precepts or not. Because although we have an idea about how the law of karma works, the fact that one has kept a precept or broken a precept has a very different feeling to it. If you have the confidence in your own precepts, then your mind feels a lot more buoyant and easy to handle when you are meditating. So it pays to have the confidence about how well you are keeping your precepts. If you have doubts about your precepts, then the guidelines which I'm about to talk about should help you to clear up any doubts. And the reason why we may have doubts is that sometimes we are put in situations which are, on the face of it, confusing. Often they are situations which have something to do with the content of the precepts, but often they are not under our control. For example, if someone was driving their car along the road and they were keeping the 5 precepts, but suddenly a dog ran out from the side of the road and they could not brake in time and they ran over the dog, would you say that such a person had broken the precepts? Why not? Okay, but the dog died. But what is it seems that it's important that the intention is in the mind of that person to have the hatred against the dog that it must die. But we know, although that it doesn't break the precept, but it still has some karma involved with it. And we know that, for example, even if you harm someone or kill someone unintentionally, then that has some karma involved with it. So it may lead you to be harmed or killed unintentionally by someone else. But it said that it doesn't break the precepts. But it may leave the precepts, let us say, damaged or soiled, sullied. But it's not so bad that you would have to retake the precepts. And there are many other situations which are rather similar dilemmas. For example, if a person didn't like the dog of their next door neighbor, because every time they walked past the neighbor's house, the dog would come and bite them. If one day they got fed up with the dog and they took down the shotgun from their house and they see the dog lying down in the neighbor's garden and they aim it and they shoot the dog. But what that person didn't know is that unfortunately that dog was not sleeping, but it had eaten some poisoned food earlier that morning and it had died of the poison, so it was lying dead and not lying asleep. If that person still shot that dead dog with the intention that it dies, is that breaking the precept? Why not? So you can't kill so the fact that it dies by your hand is important for the precepts. It's dead and you wanted it dead. So it has to die by your effort, okay? Okay, so it appears that this is also important for the precepts. How about another example? Supposing you saw a dog and looks as if it's dead because it's curled up and it's got its tongue hanging out. So you think to yourself, if you leave this dog lying here, it's going to smell very bad before long. So with your good intention, you throw the body of the dog on a bonfire so that it can be cremated. But what you didn't know is that this dog wasn't dead. It was just unconscious because it had eaten something poison, but not enough to kill it, just enough that it was knocked out for 2 or 3 hours. And if you left it alone, it would have woken up and come back to normal. But now it's really dead because you threw it on the bonfire. Is this breaking the precept? Didn't have the intention, and also you didn't know it wasn't dead. So you didn't know it was alive. So again, this appears that this is important for the deciding factor whether you break the precept or not. And last example, if you see the dog sleeping in your neighbor's garden and you take your shotgun to shoot it, but you're not a very good shot, and you shoot the ear of the dog. So you made the effort and you wanted it to die, but you only succeeded in hurting the ear of the dog. Is this breaking the precept or not? You did try your best after all to kill the dog. So it didn't end up dead, okay. So you have to be successful in your murder. Mm-hmm. So this gives us guidelines for what we call the components of the 5 precepts, where for each precept there are components which you have to fulfill. You have to break all the components of that precept in order to break the precept. So in cases where you are in a dilemma about whether you have broken a precept or whether you have merely sullied a precept, then these factors can help to give you confidence about the situation you find yourself in, so that you don't need to go wandering around with doubts in your mind, burdening yourself with guilt about things which you needn't actually worry about. Because guilty intention can be quite dangerous in itself. And there's even a monk once who, as he was paddling a boat to go on his alms round, he scraped some green slime from the mud in the canal, and he wasn't sure whether he had harmed the living beings of this green slime. And because of this doubt on his mind about the purity of his precepts, when he passed away, this happened to be the thing on his mind, instead of thinking about all the good things he had done as a monk, and he went to a bad rebirth as a result. So sometimes it's useful not only to know what the precepts are, but also to be able to be clear about what we mean by keeping the precept and what we mean, what the sort of things which we can overlook.